Hello, Internet. It's time for a one-man bat chat.
Yeah. So damn nerdy.
I'll take you to the comic shop. I'll show you all the bills I drop.
So what better way to start than with Deadpool versus Carnage? I do want to point out in here, actually, that the way that they write Carnage is a lot more akin to the Joker than they ever really have before. Though in the past, Carnage has kind of tried to capture some of that Joker, just like homicidal maniac stuff, but it's too over the top almost in a way to be Joker. Not over the top in the craziness, but in the homicidalness, which I know sounds weird, especially with recent incarnations of the Joker, but it's Carnage, and he just literally like walks and kills, whereas with Joker there's more of a randomness to it, so when he kills someone it feels like there's something more behind it, I guess, although not always, but usually it's like a mass murder by like poisoning of water or something, not so much mass murder because of deadly tentacles. So if you know what I mean with the difference there, it changes the entire tone of the character. But anyways, it's played up here more, mostly because Shriek is back, and if you know anything about like Maximum Carnage or anything, Shriek is this crazy woman with superpowers who can like zap out bolts and fly, and she's totally into Carnage, kind of in the way Harley Quinn was, and it's kind of playing on that dynamic, which makes for the funniest part in here, because Deadpool pulls a thing to like get up on the both of them, and he cracks a joke about fridging Shriek, and it is, if you're into dark humor, it's really well played, and I kind of best joke of the book, and I just kind of spell it, but there's so much more in here. This is a great book if you have any love for like the mayhem or just kind of like the offbeat stuff, the darker ends that Marvel's willing to go to. And this has just been a crazy brawl with a whole bunch of like weird crazy points in between, and playing on the idea that these maniacs are like jabbering while or right before fighting, and it's just a really fun, really bloody book, and so hooray for that. Harley Quinn 5 is really starting to kind of pull this series together. We have Borgman, as seen on the cover. He's bringing in some Yiddish and Jewish type gags that otherwise this book would not be pulling off, which is interesting because this book is pulling pretty much every gag it can. So it's interesting, though, because he's bringing in kind of a focus. He's giving Harley basically a hit list of these people that they need to go to, and it's almost as violent as the last book I talked about, and just as bloody in a way. But this book finally feels like there's a bit more of a focus to it. It's not just like this random happenstance stuff happening, but I do feel like the book, for having all that beforehand, makes this part feel more interesting. So it's not just this one point, but there's all these aspects of her life, and then this is going on, now other things have to take a backseat, and then that's going to come back and kind of bite her when we start revisiting like the sports team and her job and all that. So this should be interesting. I feel like for a few issues we're going to be going on this crazy hit revenge for Borgman, and then we're going to come back to Harley, and all the stuff that happened prior is really going to circle around. We're really going to get a feel for this book, which is interesting because it makes it, despite being so bizarre and crazy, much more like a slice of life book, and makes it a lot more lively than all these just focused on a case or bad guy of the week sort of books. Red Hood 30 continues the climb out of the pit for this book. We have Pfeiffer at the helm, and this book is better than it was, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to anyone again yet. It's been a bit more fun. It's a bit more spacefaring, which is where I feel this book tends to have its more of its own flavor and excel. It also is giving Arsenal his own kind of corner right now, which I feel is really good because there's only 3 characters, and I feel like he's been the most overlooked. I could see where some people would argue Starfire is the most overlooked. Certainly isn't Jason, but there you go. And so it's really kind of nice, and it feels like this book has its own flavor, but it's not at its strongest. Yes, it just feels like it's kind of wandering from book to book with literally Monster of the Week. So here we have Frankenstein this week, and you don't really even see that much of him, and I know he should be in the next one because they're going to try to steal something from SHADE, but he's not an agent of SHADE anymore, but they're fighting anyways, which kind of seemed to make the entire thing kind of moot. But it's happening anyways. And I didn't feel like that was justified too well. And then, it's near the end of the book, but at the end of it, we see that Lobo steps in, and he apparently is completely homicidal, and he wants to blow up the Earth. And that doesn't seem like Lobo to me. I mean, maybe they'll get to it that someone's paying him later, but it just seemed like he just was bent on world destruction, and that's where we end the book. And it's just kind of like, what? So I guess they're gonna have to stop him. Oh no. And so now it just seems like that's next week. So then what do we have after that? And if I'm not really seeing anything after that, I really do have to drop this book because it's going nowhere. So from one homicidal to another to a crazy side part of the Batman universe, we wind around to Batman Zero Year. This last part, the part that really has been building up forever, and that's this Riddler bit. And it's crazy because it feels like a weird indie Scott Snyder book where Riddler has made Gotham this crazy wild wasteland like we had seen at the beginning of Zero Year and then not since. So now it feels like that connection's kind of lost anyways, because the way it was framed before and the way it's framed now, it feels different. Now it just feels like Gotham in shambles, whereas before it looked like the Wild had completely taken over Gotham, and it doesn't really fit because the Riddler's saying you need to be fit to survive and solve these riddles, and that's still something that requires like society and infrastructure and cleverness, whereas where they're kind of going and what was shown and even in here, it's just the pure wild, so it's the strongest survive, not the smartest surviving. And so I thought that was a bizarre juxtaposition. Maybe there's something there that I'm missing, but it didn't seem to fit the theme. So beyond that, Bruce Wayne wakes up way later, and this just happens. So a lot of the story of how Gotham became this way is just, that's the problem to overcome now, and there's no explanation for it. And given that there was so much build-up to get here, the fact that this part is just skipped over feels like a real weakness in the story. So I'm not too excited about that. And the more I think about it, the more I realize, what if Zero Year started with this issue? What if we started here, got through the Riddler thing, then maybe went back to revisit a few issues of basically the last year of Batman, all this other Zero Year stuff, because there wasn't that much there. And then if you take out the Riddler component, make it much more subtle, but then we know what happens, and almost work Zero Year backwards, it seems like it would have been more compelling, because I'm realizing now that we're here, kind of what was supposed to be interesting before, but it didn't, there was no connection for it, and it was supposed to be a mystery, but it didn't feel mysterious, because when you're trying to tie threads of like a page or two, and then 8 months later remembering that page had happened and there'd been no connection since then, it's not engaging. So it's not exciting, but you start to go, oh, okay, well, that's where it's at. And so the mystery of this book is completely lost. This will read infinitely better in trade, certified now, but that doesn't mean it still is going to be a good story. It will just be better than having it piecemealed out. So, I don't know. I mean, hopefully this last bit wraps up as well and is as strong as this, because as long as it's as strong as this issue, even though it has its bizarre faults, I would, I'm still interested in enjoying this. And there was a great Gordon bit in here where the Riddler's coming down on him, and it's that quote about weak minds use cursing to express themselves forcefully, and Gordon just quips back, it's feeble minds, you... And it just, brilliant. And through all this, I feel like Gordon's clearly more of the hero than Batman, and it does kind of make the use of the Batman seem a lot more trivial here. Even though they do show him as the big badass, but it's only for a few pages here, and he was knocked out for so long, he basically should have been dead, and then he gets up and suddenly he's just fine. It's that kind of Batman plot armor thing that always bugs me about the character. But there you go, and that's where we're at in Zero Year. I hope I spoiled it enough for you so you don't actually have to go, pick it up. Batman and Wonder Woman. This issue was amazing. The way they play in mythology and tie it into this overall hunt for Robin is very masterfully done. We get a lot of the mythology stance, and whereas it plays into the bigger part, this issue on its own actually reads very much like a Wonder Woman issue should, in the sense of the New 52, where there's kind of a greater fable and monster to defeat, but also to get there, there's kind of something to be paid, and when they need to speak to the Oracle, she asks for a token. Normally, there's kind of a witty thing here, but because it's Batman, he literally just has it in his utility belt, and it's just... It was just kind of a weird interplay between the two, and I was like, that's perfect. Even though it was such a small little part. There's another thing here about Artemis being very against man, and not wanting Batman on the island. There's just a lot of small touches here that show like a bizarre play between the two that I think is something a lot of DC Universe books don't do so well, is understanding each one of these characters have their worlds, but they're all part of the same universe, and so they'd interact, but they'd almost have to kind of play by different rules when they're working with each other. And this book exemplifies that so well between these two characters. The only downside, and you can kind of see it right here on the cover, is the way Gleason does Wonder Woman just doesn't quite look right. Too much mascara. I just, for whatever reason, doesn't feel like Wonder Woman to me. It just feels like a very glammed up woman. It's a very small thing to complain about, and that's really all that you can say negative about this issue. This was incredible. So definitely check this out if you were kind of wondering, though it might be... You wouldn't be getting everything because this Hunt for Robin's been tying between. And with the Red Hood bit, next month we're looking at Frankenstein, so it should be interesting. It also feels like DC's playing up and wanting to bring Frankenstein back by some sort of editorial mandate. So that should be interesting. Issue 30 of Wonder Woman. This is monumental. This is huge. This is where we reconnect. So pretty much the entire time Diana's been absent from the Amazons, but here she comes back. It's pointed out to her that she really is the queen currently. She comes back and she wants to make some small changes, and there's a huge amount of fight against it, about any amount of change, and there's interestingly a lot of like conservative versus liberal sort of subtle commentary slipped in there, definitely, and the idea of wanting to change, being against it, but saying that we're sticking to what our founders would have wanted to our detriment. We need to grow and we need to change, and it's really monumental to see that she left. And despite having felt apart from them for a lot of the time, coming back, she realizes this is her people. and she's one of them, but she's seeing that this is what they need to do to be a better people. And it's just this interesting juxtaposition as being a leader, having been absent and being more worldly, and not in a way that it was with the Justice League or anything, but for this entire adventure, this entire run, and now coming back, and this is where Wonder Woman is. And I'm really hoping this level of character development is kept with the character as a through line throughout the entire DC universe, because that's the sort of huge kind of movement that makes a really powerful story, makes a really powerful character, is why we keep coming back to this stuff. It's really exemplified here, and this is huge. And what's more telling is this is an interesting issue in its own right, but without the 29 issues prior, it doesn't resonate with the same touch, because you need to have the epic story, you need to have the complete serialized idea of what's going forward, and that's what's really making this so powerful and making this build all the more worthwhile. So at this point, I'd say if you're a fan of superheroes, if you're a fan of comics, you really need to be reading this, and I don't know really anyone who isn't. So I'm just going to keep preaching to the choir, man. Good stuff. Alright, Batman Eternal 2. This is an incredible issue. We see not only the fallout of last issue and where it's going with Gordon, but we get almost maybe too much revealed right away, and we start to see the mastermind, though if my mystery detector's going off, he may not be the true mastermind behind everything, but we get a big reveal at the end, but this mystery keeps building, and there's a lot of play here in this issue to tie this event to most characters in the extended Batman universe. And what really kind of shook me is realizing how much they are right now because of what's been taken off the board. There's no more Damian. There's no more Dick. And they don't really say that here because I didn't think about it, but of course they're not there. And so when you get Batgirl and Tim and Catwoman, and even a quick Red Hood bit, like, wow, that's where we're at. And it's kind of interesting to see that it shrunk, and now we're dealing with this, and it's like, wow, it's just one thing after another. But this book is definitively the best Batman book they're putting out right now. So, as much as it kind of sucks being a weekly, I guess, I mean, it sucks because it costs money, but you're paying $2.99 an issue still. It just comes out frequently, and if it keeps up this level of quality and is this intriguing, I don't think that's really a bad thing. It probably would be worth dropping a couple of the other Bat books to be getting this one, because it is so much more intriguing, so much more of what Batman should be about, and it's so much more interesting to see all the characters in Gotham coming around a single story and working together the way that you'd imagine characters operating on that level in the same city actually would. So, yeah, this one's so far hitting on all cylinders, and here's hoping a few more issues in, it keeps this kind of pace. And to be fair to DC's track record, I know that people are saying basically, I mean, there were a bunch of weeklies that didn't resonate so well, that there was that 52 miniseries that did pretty well, had some faults, stumbled here and there, but tended to work. And yes, I would also like to point out, for a while they were trading off between Brightest Day and Generation Lost, which was kind of a Justice League International. And I wasn't such a big fan of Brightest Day, but I know a lot of people did really like that. But I can say for certainty, Justice League International Generation Lost was incredible, and one of the best things being put out from DC around that time period, which makes it better than pretty much everything in the New 52 still. So there's more quality there in that legacy than I think some people are bringing up. And if this book keeps on this track record, I think it's really going to stand out. And it's kind of funny that it's another Bat book, but at the same time, like, a weekly Bat book with pretty much all their top talent, or most of their top talent, on one book coming together and doing the one thing that DC seems to know how to do, I think actually really does have a lot of promise to resonate well. The part I'm kind of worried about is there's this weekly, and I think it's going to go good for a while, but I feel like there's a chance for a quality slip once we start looking at 2 and then 3 weekly books running concurrently. That'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see how DC handles that. But it's kind of a big gamble, but in a way I'm almost hoping they pull it off, because a lot of these books sound a lot more intriguing and a lot more promising than another big event, and then a lot of the other stuff that they've been putting out. So hurrah for that. In other stuff, I have a question of the week for my dedicated viewers that stay to the end, because those are the only people I like asking questions to. I recently kind of been on a Batman kick, despite myself, which kind of hurts the soul a little bit. But, you know, most of what DC puts out is that, so I guess it kind of makes sense. I recently got turned on. I want to read, and I'm going to find Batman Year 2, and then probably Year 3. But I've been realizing there's probably some other good second-tier Batman stories, maybe some shorter ones that wouldn't have been collected in trade, that you guys know about and love. And I'd like to hear about that. So if you have kind of favorite B-level Batman stories, please tell me about it. I'm just taking up the table because I'm looking at, Year 2, Year 3. Before Minutia Minute mentioned Dark City to me, which was interesting. I'm really glad he did, because it kind of gave me an into this whole 0 year thing leading into all that. And so there are those, and obviously, like, I know about the Jeff Loeb, Tim Sale stuff, Year 1, Dark Knight Return. All the obvious stuff. Yeah, Hush is a great story, but who hasn't heard about Hush by now? Like, I'm talking about kind of more B-list stuff, and probably, if it's collected and trade, not as much, but there's tons of Batman trades, so maybe there's some you could point out that, I don't know, and then I would also take off the table, like, No Man's Land, because I did actually read that not too long ago, so I know about that one. But also, like, the Nightfall trilogy thing, that's way too long, and that kind of thing, but be curious. I've put enough stipulations on it by now, right? So, yeah. But I hope you all are having a great week of comics. This has been 2 weeks of pretty good comics for me, and it's kind of making me evaluate and wonder, like, maybe I need to cancel some comics, but they're on weeks where they're so light, I almost feel like I don't want to, because that's kind of what I want to pick up that week, and maybe need to stop looking at it that way as much, but, I don't know. So, carry on, people.